In this tutorial, we're going to start looking at formulas, which introduces a whole world of possibilities and just makes your horizon stretch out as far as the morning sun. So we're going to look at something called the if formula, and we're going to use the budget that we've already been building, and it doesn't look very nice at the minute. You've got these big false or true statements in column C. Now, the other thing is bearing in mind, when you build this budget, it'll be before you've actually completed the year. So what you'll have done is probably drag this formula all the way to the bottom to complete the list. But as you can see, it's returning false. Now, why is it doing that? Again, click inside the cell. Well, it's looking into here whether what's in May exceeds what's in cell B1. And so there's nothing in the month of May, and it actually reads that as a 0. So its testing is 0 greater than 100? Well, false, no. So it keeps returning false under exceeded budget for all of these months. And it just doesn't look very nice. So there's a couple of things that we want to do, actually, to fix this so that it is just a little bit easier on the eye, and we're going to use the if formula to do that. Now, the if formula operates on a certain kind of syntax. So what you do is, as with every formula, you're going to enter the equal sign, and then you're going to type if and open the brackets, parentheses. Now there you can see Excel helpfully tells you it's expecting you now to output a certain syntax for it to read. First, you have to input a logical test, then a comma, then the value you want it to output if that test returns true, then a comma, then the value that you want that cell to output if that test returns false, and then close the brackets. So we're going to end up with something that looks like this. And sometimes, especially when you're starting out, it's helpful to simply type out the syntax so you know exactly what you need to fill in. Although Excel also helps you with this little pop-up here. So now, obviously, you can type any test in here. You can type in, for example, you can type in B4 greater than B, well, let's remember B1, let's remember to freeze B1 in place. This is essentially exactly the same as what we've typed in this cell, C4. So you're completing a test in here. Now you want it to do something if that test returns true after this comma. But I tell you what, I'm not going to complete this in this cell, CE3, because as you can, I'm sure, guess, we may as well just do it in C4. So I'm going back to C4 now, and I'm just going to update the formula by turning it into an if formula. So here we've got the test, and then we've got our 2 commas, and then we'll close the parentheses. Then you know you've got the syntax ready. So we got the logical test here. If you click on this little logical test hyperlink, it actually highlights that part of the syntax for you, which is very useful. Now, what do we want it to do if that returns true? Have we exceeded the budget? Let's say that we'd like it to output the value yes. Well, something is going to go wrong. Now, obviously, I won't show you that just yet. Let's just try to do this the way that we want to do it. Something's going to go wrong. So, you'd want to say, if it's true that we've exceeded the budget, output yes. If it's false, output no, which is just a little bit neater. But something's going to go wrong because, well, I'll show you. It comes out with this weird error called name. Now that's because in these 2 sections where you've just typed yes and no, Excel doesn't know how to read yes and no in this format. If what you're wanting it to output is something called a string, in other words, just plain text, you always need to surround it in speech marks, because you're telling it to simply output the text yes or no. That's something that can be quite confusing to start with, but essentially just remember, if you want it to output a text value, you always need to surround that text with speech marks, yes or no. Now if you hit enter, you have something that I think looks a little bit neater than just a big true or false statement. I mean, you can even just have Y and N if you think that's even neater, you know, and I think that looks already just a lot more manageable. Now, of course, we're going to want this to go the entire way down. So I'm just going to copy, Control C, and then select the entire range. Remember, a range is just an area of cells, and then paste in the formula, Control V, or right click, you can paste, but then you need to be, if you're using right click, make sure you paste in the formula. Don't just paste or paste values. I think you can just paste, but yeah, you want to make sure that you're pasting the formula all the way down, and there you go. So we fixed one problem, but there's still another problem, which is that it's still outputting a response to all of these months which you haven't yet filled in. So how do we fix that? Well, let's say I want to fix it for the relevant month. I'm just going to go to that row and I'm going to update this right now. And the way that you can do that is it's something called nesting. So if you want to nest one if statement inside another, now that can get a little bit tricky, but it's actually very simple. You just take all of this and you say, okay, I'm going to contain this inside another if statement. And what I want to do is test whether B8 is empty or not. And the way to do that is, and I'll show you in an empty cell, is to simply use the speech marks with nothing in between them. So you want to say, is B8, does that equal nothing, empty? And you see it's returning true because that is empty. If we copy that up here, it will return false because that is not empty. And that will be our test. And so we're going to use that for all of these. As you can see, that's how we're testing whether an input exists in each of these months. So that's the test that we're going to be using. And so you can do it quite simply. Again, at the very beginning, you just want to say if, open the parentheses. Now it wants your logical test. If that is blank, then do what? How about be blank yourself? Do nothing. And that's what you're going to do if that's true. If that's false, then proceed with your normal formula. So that's called nesting an if statement. Now you need to remember, when it comes to nesting, keeping track of the syntax can be a little bit complicated. And so I know that I need to put another bracket in here at the end so that I can finish off my full if formula. Excel does a number of things to help you keep track. So for example, when you go left and right across any bracket, it shows you which bracket it corresponds to. So every open bracket needs to correspond to a closed bracket. And it also color codes them. So the black ones refer to my overall formula. The red ones refer to my nested formula. And the other thing that you can do is also click in the sections to highlight which bit refers to which bit of syntax. So the logical test is B8 blank. What happens if that's true? I'm going to return nothing. What happens if that's false and there is something in that column? Well, then I'm going to complete my original formula. And there you go. And so now you can see that in the month of May, it's returning blank. And you can copy that across the entire column. And that now looks a lot better. Now, let's say you go into the month of May and you had a really bad month, and let's say you spent 200. There you go. It's going to fill that in without having all those ugly, superfluous returned results that you don't need. So that's the if formula. It can be a bit tricky at the start, but once you get your head around it, it's incredibly powerful.